When we talk about the word establishment, we are not just talking about a building or an office. We are talking about something much bigger, something that shapes how society works. The establishment refers to the powerful institutions, groups, and individuals who hold long-term influence over politics, the economy, and the media. Think of it as the system that has been built over decades, sometimes centuries, to keep things running in a certain way. In politics, the establishment includes elected officials, career politicians, government agencies, and the networks of advisors and lobbyists who work behind the scenes. These are the people who know how the system functions because they have been inside it for years. They write the rules, enforce the laws, and make sure policies stay within a certain range of what they consider acceptable. In the economy, the establishment includes large corporations, banks, and financial institutions. These organizations are not just businesses, they also influence how governments make decisions. For example, Wall Street has a voice in Washington because money and politics are tightly connected. When you hear about campaign donations, special interests, or lobbying, you are hearing about how the economic establishment protects its position. Then we come to the media. The establishment here refers to the large, traditional news organizations, television networks, newspapers, and digital platforms that shape what information reaches the public. For decades, these outlets were considered the official voice of truth. If a story made it onto the front page of the New York Times or onto the evening news, people believed it was important and credible. The media establishment in this way sets the agenda. They decide what we talk about and what we don't. Now, why is this idea of the establishment important to understand? Because in every society, power does not exist equally among all people. Power concentrates in institutions that have the ability to influence decisions, public opinion, and even cultural values. The establishment is not necessarily evil, but it is deeply protective of itself. It wants to maintain stability, control, and authority. Change, especially rapid or disruptive change, is often seen as a threat. This is where the tension begins when someone like Donald Trump enters the picture. Before his presidency, Trump was not part of the political establishment. He was a businessman, a celebrity, and an outsider. He did not play by the traditional rules. Instead, he positioned himself as a voice of the people, someone who would drain the swamp of Washington. His message was that the establishment, politicians, the media, and the elites had failed ordinary Americans. For many supporters, this made sense. They felt the establishment was only serving itself, ignoring the struggles of everyday citizens. But for the establishment, Trump was a direct challenge. His words, his style, and his actions disrupted the old order. The media especially became a battlefield. Coverage of Trump was everywhere, sometimes critical, sometimes sensational, but always unavoidable. Why? Because the establishment does not stay silent when it feels disrespected. And here lies the lesson. When we talk about the establishment, we are talking about a structure of power that does two things at once. It provides stability, but it also resists change. That is why understanding it is so important. Without recognizing who holds power and why, we cannot understand how news, politics, and public opinion really work. So when you hear the word establishment, remember, it is not a single person, not a single office, but a system built to maintain order, but also one that reacts strongly when it is challenged. Now that we understand what the establishment is, let's move into the second keynote, Donald Trump versus the establishment. This conflict is one of the defining stories of modern American politics. To grasp it fully, we must understand not only who Trump is, but why his rise was such a shock to the traditional system. Donald Trump, long before becoming president, was known as a businessman and television personality. He built a brand on wealth, fame, and boldness. But in politics, he was an outsider. He had no prior government experience, no history of holding public office, and no roots in the networks that usually guide candidates through the political ladder. In other words, he was not a creature of the establishment, and for many Americans, that was exactly what made him appealing. When Trump announced his campaign for the presidency in 2015, few in the political world took him seriously. The establishment, career politicians, party leaders, and major media outlets saw him as entertainment, not as a real candidate. But something happened that they did not expect. Trump's message began to resonate with large groups of people. His speeches, filled with simple but powerful phrases like, "Make America Great Again," and "Drain the Swamp," struck a chord with citizens who felt left out of the system. To his supporters, Trump represented rebellion against the establishment. He was blunt, unpolished, and willing to say things other politicians avoided. He criticized the media directly, calling them biased. He questioned government officials, accusing them of corruption. He rejected political correctness, which many felt had gone too far. All of these actions positioned him as the anti-establishment candidate. Now, how did the establishment respond? With resistance. Political elites within both the Democratic and Republican parties were skeptical of him. Media outlets gave him heavy coverage, but much of it was critical. Traditional institutions worried that his unpredictability would destabilize the system. The establishment thrives on stability, order, and control, and Trump's style was anything but controlled. The battle between Trump and the establishment played out most visibly in the news. On one side, Trump used social media, especially Twitter, as his direct microphone to the people. He bypassed traditional news filters and spoke in his own voice. On the other side, media organizations published endless stories, debates, and commentary on his words and actions. The result was a 24/7 news cycle centered on Trump. Supporters saw this as proof that the establishment was threatened by him. Critics saw it as evidence of his recklessness. But let's pause here and find the educational lesson. This clash is bigger than Trump himself. It is a case study in what happens when an outsider challenges a long-standing system. The establishment by nature does not welcome disruption. And yet, history shows us that disruptive figures often emerge when large numbers of people feel ignored or disrespected by those in power. In this way, Trump's rise was not only about him, it was about the millions who supported him as their voice against the establishment. And here's the key point. When two forces, an outsider and an establishment, collide, the reaction is not small, it is loud, constant, and deeply emotional. That is why we continue to see Donald Trump in the news. Even years after his presidency, his story is not just about one man, it is about the larger struggle between tradition and disruption, between order and change. So when we speak of Trump versus the establishment, we are really speaking about a universal conflict, old systems versus new voices, power versus rebellion, respect versus defiance. And this, my friends, is not just America's story. It is a story that repeats itself throughout history. Whenever people begin to ask, who really holds the power and whose voices are being ignored? When we talk about Donald Trump and the establishment, we cannot ignore one of the most powerful players in this entire story, the media. The media is not just about headlines and news anchors reading from a script. It is about shaping the way we see the world. It is about deciding what is important, what gets attention, and what fades into the background. And in the modern era, media is more powerful than ever before. For decades, traditional media, newspapers, television networks, and radio stations were considered the gatekeepers of information. They were the establishment's voice. They told the public what mattered, and most people believed them. If something was on the front page of the Washington Post or the evening news, it was considered fact. That is the power of media. It does not just reflect reality, it creates the reality that people pay attention to. Now, enter Donald Trump. From the very beginning of his campaign, he understood something critical. Media thrives on attention, drama, controversy, bold statements. These are the things that keep people watching, reading, and clicking. And Trump knew how to provide all of it. Every tweet, every rally, every sharp comment was designed not just as communication, but as fuel for the media machine. The result, Trump dominated headlines like no candidate before him. News channels covered his every move. Newspapers ran story after story. Social media exploded with his name trending day after day. Some of this coverage was negative, some was supportive, but all of it kept him in the center of attention. And here's the lesson in politics. Visibility is power. If you are the topic of every conversation, you control the narrative, even when the narrative is critical. But this power of media cuts both ways. On one side, Trump used it to amplify his voice directly to the people, often bypassing traditional outlets with his Twitter account. On the other side, the media establishment used its platform to question him, criticize him, and hold him accountable. This created a cycle. Trump said something bold, the media amplified it, his supporters rallied, his critics pushed back, and the cycle repeated endlessly. This relationship between Trump and the media is educational for all of us. It teaches us about the role of media in democracy. Media is supposed to inform the public, to hold leaders accountable, and to provide facts. But media is also a business. It needs views, clicks, and ratings. And Donald Trump, whether you admired him or not, was ratings gold. That is why his name never left the headlines. Now let's step back from Trump for a moment and ask, what is the deeper lesson here? The lesson is that media has the power to shape not only what we think about, but how we think about it. If the media gives constant coverage to conflict, we begin to see the world as divided. If it highlights fear, we begin to feel anxious. If it focuses on hope, we feel inspired. Media does not just deliver news, it sets the emotional tone of a nation. And here's the challenge for us as citizens, as students, as thinkers. We must learn to engage with media critically. We must ask who is telling this story? Why are they telling it this way? What voices are included and which ones are left out? Because if we do not ask these questions, we risk being shaped by the narrative without even realizing it. Donald Trump versus the establishment may be the headline, but the real power behind that story is the media. It is the stage, the microphone, and sometimes even the script. And if we truly want to understand politics, society, and the world we live in, we must learn not just to consume media, but to analyze it, question it, and see the bigger picture. That is the true power of media and the responsibility that comes with understanding it. If there is one human emotion that can move mountains, start wars, and shape the headlines every single day, it is this: the feeling of being disrespected. Think about it. In your own life, what happens when you feel disrespected by a friend, by a teacher, by a colleague, or even by a stranger? Most of us do not simply stay silent. We react, sometimes calmly, sometimes angrily, sometimes with silence that carries more weight than words. Disrespect touches something deep inside us because it makes us feel invisible, unheard, or unvalued. And in politics, that same truth holds power. Now, let's connect this to the establishment and Donald Trump. For decades, the establishment, the politicians, the media, the economic elite were used to being respected, even feared. Their authority was rarely questioned in the way Trump questioned it. When he stood on stage and declared that the system was rigged, that the media was fake, and that the politicians were corrupt, the establishment heard it as disrespect. To them, this was not just criticism, it was a direct attack on their legitimacy. And how did they react? Exactly as human beings do. They fought back. Political leaders dismissed him, commentators ridiculed him, newspapers published scathing editorials. The establishment, like anyone else who feels disrespected, could not simply ignore it. They had to respond, because silence would look like weakness. But here's the other side of the story. Trump himself built his entire movement on the idea that he and his supporters had been disrespected for years. He argued that ordinary Americans were being ignored by elites in Washington and in the media. And for many people across the country, that message felt true. They felt disrespected by a system that overlooked their struggles, their communities, their values. Trump gave that feeling a voice. This is why the clash became so intense. You had two powerful groups, the establishment and Trump's movement, each feeling disrespected, each reacting louder and stronger than before. The more the establishment pushed back, the more Trump claimed it proved his point. The more Trump attacked, the more the establishment responded with criticism and coverage. The cycle of disrespect and reaction fueled the constant storm of headlines. Now, what's the lesson for us in all of this? The lesson is that disrespect is a trigger. It ignites emotion. It drives behavior. And whether in politics, in schools, in workplaces, or in families, when people feel disrespected, they are unlikely to listen or compromise. They will defend themselves. They will protect their dignity. But here's the higher truth. Respect does not mean agreement. Respect means recognition. It means saying, I hear you. I may not agree with you, but I see your humanity. That is what was missing in much of the Trump versus establishment conflict. Both sides were so focused on defending themselves from disrespect that they forgot how to listen. So let's bring this lesson home. In your own lives, ask yourself, how do I react when I feel disrespected? Do I lash out? Do I shut down, or do I find a way to rise above it? And equally important, how do I treat others, even those I disagree with? Do I dismiss them, ignore them, or belittle them? Or do I offer them the respect that allows for real dialogue? The story of Trump and the establishment is not just about politics. It is a mirror held up to human nature. When disrespected, we react. But when respected, even across differences, we create the possibility of understanding, growth, and change. So let's remember, disrespect is powerful, but respect is transformative. And if we want progress in our communities, in our schools, in our politics, we must choose the harder but more rewarding path to offer respect, even when it's not given in return. Every story in history is only as valuable as the lessons we choose to take from it. And the ongoing drama between Donald Trump and the establishment is no exception. It is not just a political battle. It is not just a news cycle. It is a mirror that shows us something about ourselves, about human nature, and about how societies grow or fall apart. So what is the lesson for us? The first lesson is about the power of listening. Think about it. The establishment and Trump supporters were speaking past one another. Each side was so focused on defending itself, on proving its point, that neither side truly listened to the other. And this is what happens in our everyday lives as well. When we feel unheard, we raise our voices. When we still feel unheard, we start shouting. And before long, communication breaks down completely. If we can learn to pause, to truly listen, even when we disagree, we begin to create space for solutions rather than endless conflict. The second lesson is about respect. Respect is not agreement. Respect does not mean you endorse someone's choices or ideas. Respect simply means I see you, I recognize your humanity, your perspective exists, and I am willing to acknowledge it. That simple act can diffuse anger, soften resistance, and open doors. Imagine how different our schools, workplaces, and governments could be if respect, not ego, not insult, guided our interactions. The third lesson is about critical thinking. The media plays a huge role in how we perceive reality, but media, like people, has its own interests. its own biases, its own limitations. The lesson for us is not to blindly accept what we see on a screen or read in a headline. The lesson is to ask questions. Who is telling me this? Why are they telling me this now? What voices are missing from this story? Critical thinking protects us from being manipulated, and it gives us the power to form our own informed opinions. The fourth lesson is about the cycle of disrespect. What Trump and the establishment showed us is that when disrespect is met with more disrespect, the conflict does not end, it escalates. And that's true in politics, but also in classrooms, families, and communities. If one person yells and the other yells louder, what happens? The noise grows, but no one hears. The lesson here is that breaking the cycle takes courage. It takes someone willing to step back and say, I will not fuel this fire. I will try another way. The fifth and perhaps deepest lesson is about our role as citizens and human beings. We cannot wait for leaders to fix everything. We cannot simply complain about the system and then walk away. We each have a responsibility to engage, to learn, to speak up, and to vote. Not only in elections, but in the decisions we make every day about how to treat others. Democracy is not something that happens only in Washington, D.C. Democracy is something that happens around dinner tables, in classrooms, in neighborhoods. So here is what I want us to carry forward. We must learn to be both critical and compassionate, critical enough to question the stories we are told, the systems we are part of, and the voices that dominate the conversation, compassionate enough to remember that behind every argument, every vote, every headline, there are human beings, people with fears, hopes, and dreams. Because at the end of the day, the real lesson is not about Trump or the establishment. It is about us. How do we handle disagreement? How do we respond to disrespect? How do we build bridges instead of walls? These are the questions that will decide the future, not just of politics, but of our communities, our relationships, and our humanity itself. Every story needs an ending, but endings are really just beginnings in disguise. And after everything we have learned about the establishment, Donald Trump, the media, and the cycle of disrespect, the question before us now is, where do we go from here? How do we move forward? Moving forward means refusing to stay trapped in the past. It means we take the lessons we've learned about power, about respect, about media influence, and we turn them into action. Because what good is knowledge if it doesn't guide us toward change? The first step forward is reclaiming the power of dialogue. We live in a world where shouting has replaced conversation, where debates are won by volume instead of by wisdom. But real progress begins when people sit down and talk, not to score points, not to humiliate, but to understand. Moving forward requires us to rebuild the art of conversation. Imagine a society where listening is as valued as speaking. That is not a dream. It is a choice we can make. The second step is strengthening critical awareness. The media is powerful, yes, but we are not powerless. Every headline we read, every story we watch, is an opportunity for us to ask, what is the bigger picture here? What are they not telling me? Moving forward means becoming not just consumers of information, but active participants in truth seeking. When citizens are informed, societies are strong. The third step is choosing respect over division. Division may feel powerful in the moment. Anger is loud and disrespect can feel satisfying, but those emotions don't build anything. They only break things apart. Moving forward requires us to recognize that respect is not weakness. It is strength. It is the foundation upon which trust and progress are built. If politicians, leaders, and ordinary people alike embraced respect, even when disagreeing, imagine how much more we could accomplish. The fourth step is personal responsibility. Too often, we place the blame entirely on leaders, institutions, or the system. But the truth is, we are all part of the system. Every time we vote, every time we share information online, every time we choose to listen or to dismiss someone, we are shaping the culture we live in. Moving forward means no longer waiting for others to change the world. It means recognizing that change begins with us. The fifth step is education and empowerment. Moving forward means teaching the next generation how to think critically, how to question respectfully, and how to participate actively in society. If children grow up learning only to follow or only to fight, the cycle continues. But if they grow up learning to listen, analyze, and lead with compassion, the future changes. Education is not just about facts. It is about shaping citizens who are ready to build a healthier world. And finally, moving forward means hope. Hope is not blind optimism. Hope is the courage to see problems clearly and still believe we can overcome them. Hope is the belief that even in division, there is a path to unity. Hope is what allows us to imagine something better and then work for it together. So, as we close this journey through the establishment, Donald Trump, the media, disrespect, and the lessons we have gathered, let's remember this: history is not written only by leaders or institutions. History is written by people, by you, by me, by us. Moving forward is not a call to them, it is a call to all of us. And the choice is ours. Do we repeat the cycles of anger, disrespect, and division, or do we step forward with respect, wisdom, and courage to build something new. The future will be the answer to that question. And it begins not tomorrow, not someday. It begins now.